My name is Rachelle Dusting. I am a fine artist that specialises in oil painting, specifically in portraiture and realistic painting. Well, where it all started for me was probably when I was a child, and I would always try and make my little hobbies into businesses. So I would go door knocking on weekends with my little girlfriends. After we'd spend some time making greeting cards, and we'd go door knocking and sell the greeting cards for like a gold coin donation. And then that kind of progressed into middle school, where I was obsessed with making jewellery, beaded jewellery, earrings, bracelets, necklaces. And I'd always try and get my mum and her girlfriends together to sell to them on the weekends as my little bit of pocket money. And then that kind of progressed into, I guess, naturally selling my art. And I was in year 12. I had done a drawing as part of my folio, and my school chaplain actually approached me to buy the drawing off of me. And that was the first kind of moment where I realised that I could sell my art. And I think, yeah, that's kind of where it started. I had really good art teachers in high school too, who I think really nurtured my drawing skills. And then that kind of progressed into my interest in oil painting and continuing on those skills in realism, but using a paintbrush instead of a pencil. After high school, I actually didn't get enough grades to get into uni. So there was a moment where I didn't think that I would pursue that as a career path, I guess. I always thought that I would go to TAFE and do something that was kind of like a certificate in visual art or even in interior design, because I just loved colour and textures, and I ended up getting into uni second round into UWA to do the fine art degree. Experimented a lot in those 3 years of study. And then kind of got halfway through third year and was like, what am I going to do with my life after this? I haven't really spent any time painting or drawing. And so it was kind of at that point that I decided I needed more time. I needed more time to have a studio space, so I applied for honours and thankfully got in and dedicated that final fourth year to portraiture, painting in oils, and just exploring the medium and developing my own body of work, I guess. I ended up graduating, and about 4 or 5 months after graduating had a solo exhibition at Free Range Gallery, which is no longer. But that really helped, I guess, launch me into my practice straight away. I was only, I think, 21 or 22 years old at the time. And then got invited back to UWA to teach one of the beginner drawing units, first year, second year units. And so did that in 2015 and 16. And all of a sudden that job wasn't there anymore. So I was kind of faced with this opportunity. Do I continue to teach and practice but go out on my own? Or do I get some kind of job to support that? And I thought, I'm so young, I'm still living at my parents' house, let's just not have a plan B and go for it. And have been full-time ever since, so yeah. I guess when I first realised that I could pursue a painting practice as a career, it was shortly after I graduated. I was travelling overseas. I met an artist called David Casson, who I actually discovered his work in high school. So it was probably about 4 years after finding his work. I was travelling in America. I contacted David, who was American. I was visiting his hometown, and he replied straight away when I sent him a message about just catching up, being able to ask him some questions about painting full-time and all of that, and discovered that David wasn't actually in America at that point, that I was travelling. He was in Adelaide, of all places, and from that conversation, we discovered that we were going to be in another city at the same time. So he very generously met up with me, and we got to discuss, all the things, art, painting, what he has been doing, like in order to kind of allow himself to be a full-time artist. And when he heard my dream to one day start an art school, which is a dream I've had since I was 19, mostly because the opportunity that I wanted when I was that age, I didn't have the opportunity to explore in a city like Perth. And so when I met David, he mentioned to me an artist called Robin Ely. And Robin is a fantastic hyperrealist painter who's based in Adelaide. And so I ended up getting in contact with Robin. I did one of his short courses, and it was kind of from that moment that I really started to kind of get into more of a slipstream with harnessing the skills that I had and learning about the paint more practically, understanding and kind of getting like a window into how to create a realistic artwork from scratch. And it really pulled a lot of the knowledge that I already have, but put it kind of in a way that I could clearly understand. And it was the first experience I had where I wasn't in a learning environment where I was being talked down to for not understanding really foundational information. And so that was like a real, I would say, a turning point very early on that I had. That has now informed my own practice, and particularly my teaching practice as well. I owe a lot to both David and Robin for that experience. I think the way that I had viewed David's work online, there were a few artists based in New York at the time who were learning through the New York Art Academy, the New York Academy of Art, and the Art Society over there too. There's a Portrait Society as well, and they all were just so amazing in their skills, and it wasn't anything like I could find in Australia at the time. I think since the advancement of social media, being able to meet other artists in that same skill set is so much easier to do now more than ever. But 15 years ago, it wasn't as easy, and Instagram had only kind of just, Instagram and Facebook were very, very new. And so, yeah, I think now it's a little bit easier for artists to be able to engage in other, or maybe behind the scenes more with other artists' practice. But at the time, I just really was so hungry for more knowledge in this area of, painting and in oils. And when I discovered David's work, I was just so enamored by it and really impressed with the level of skill and detail and kind of like craftsmanship, the real mastery of his skill. I had yet to really fully experience, maybe outside of a small handful of artists that I had referenced, in high school projects. So when David responded the way that he did, it really made me feel so much more hopeful to be able to pursue things as a career, not just as a hobby. I feel like there are just so many artists who have influenced my experience as a student, and I've taken as much as I can on board whilst learning in those early days. I think there's certain parts of my teaching experience that's been gathered from a lot of different artists around Australia and internationally who aren't just good painters, but they're also really good teachers. And there is, I think when I was doing my degree, I was very green in the area of painting and understanding the foundational elements of tone and color theory and just very baseline, knowledge of any kind of visual art practice. And so experiencing different artists along the way, Andrew Tischler has been someone who I've learnt like early days from, who encouraged me to not paint, on a white canvas, like always tone your surface. And there was Paul Newton, who is an incredible realist painter and has the ability to capture light so beautifully with his brush. And I've learnt in recent years from Paul how to just loosen up my work and really be able to capture light with a really large brush. And the things that I've learnt from Robin is probably just the practice and the discipline of practicing. I think that's definitely one of the biggest take homes that I've been able to apply to my own practice, and the way that I understand colour in terms of its value and these concepts of temperature and all of the things that kind of are bundled up in this nice little phrase called colour theory. I don't think I really had a full comprehension of what that could mean for my own painting practice. So those things have definitely influenced the way that I now am able to articulate specifically the needs of the people that I teach, because I have dedicated that excessive amount of time to practicing. There have been so many different moments over the years of being a student where I have really thrived under instruction, but I've also really floundered under, certain artists who are incredible in their own right, but just maybe weren't as direct in their teaching style, or perhaps were too direct and left a very lasting impression in the wrong way. And so I think that something that I really carry as a value, very strong value of mine as a teacher, is that I want to be a good artist who's also a good teacher. And that means practicing communication, and the more that I think personally, the more I paint as an artist, the more I teach at the same time, I'm further confirming my beliefs in my own practice, because I have the opportunity to have to explain that to someone else. And I think very early on, what I really wanted to, have as a defining feature of my own teaching practice is not to gatekeep on certain information. I learnt really early that if I was in a workshop where there were 20 plus other painters, and we all had the same palette, we all had the same image, but every one of us walked away from that workshop experience with a painting that looked different to the person next to us. I remember thinking that at the time and realizing that means that I have the full freedom to teach what I do in the studio when no one's in here, and I don't have to be secretive or precious about things because someone else can apply the exact same palette of colours and photo reference but still achieve a very different result. And I still see that even today when I am teaching these large workshops myself now on the other side, where no one walks away with the exact same artwork. And it is a very liberating thing. I think sometimes maybe people would think of that experience as an area where they would compare themselves and kind of take on the negative side. But I like to appreciate the fact that if you walk away with a different result, like that's your own way of mark making, and that's something very unique to that person, in the same way that the marks that I make on canvas are going to be completely different, even if someone were to attentively try to execute things in the same way. Something that I like to think about when I'm in a classroom context is not just relaying information, but seeing what kind of background that person has come from. Are they used to using watercolour, or maybe they're used to using clay? And depending on what their experience is, can have a very different influence in their work. So if I'm trying to teach someone about brush marks and knowing that if they're a potter, they're going to be a lot more heavy-handed with the paint than a watercolour or a pencil artist would be, because they're used to touching things very softly and lightly. So they might need encouragement to really use the paint and harness the paint and sculpt with it more than a potter might, or a ceramicist might, because they're already used to using that as the familiar medium. So they might need to really harness it and be more deliberate with how much they're using. And so knowing that, I think that's what makes probably my classes a bit more unique in that sense, because I really want the experience of the painters in these taught environments to feel like they can take something really valuable away with them that will help inform their own practice and make them a better, more observant artist, essentially. I think it's taken me a little while to understand what's important to me and what do I want my artistic voice to be in painting. I think in trying to make it as an artist full-time, you say yes to projects a lot more than you say no at the beginning. And because of that, you end up saying yes to all of these different styles and commission work and murals and whatever the kind of trending project at the time is. And so I think looking back over the last 15 years of me being a painter, I've definitely allocated a lot of time to those different areas, more than I have funneled the time into that one specific area that I now am probably more recognised in. When people hear of my work, they probably think straight away to oil paints and portraits. Whereas I think when I first started out, I was doing a little bit of abstract, I was, doing illustration, and that was more because I was just saying yes to all the projects and I just wanted the experience and I wanted to practice. But I would say perhaps since 2017, 2018, I've really started to channel my style into the style it is now. I definitely feel now more than ever the most convicted about the themes that I'm working on in my pieces. So a lot of that is to do with my own personal journey in fertility and in being a woman, and my constant fascination with beauty and how to create art that is beautiful but that also has substance to it, that can drive really thought-provoking conversation but also carry a real skill and a mastery. I think in my recent body of work, in my exhibition Sacred Ground, which is on at Midland Junction Art Centre at the moment, I talk a lot about these topics that I have journeyed through over the last maybe 3 to 4 years. And it's taken that length of time to even be comfortable in talking about those personal, issues or experiences in a cohesive way that I am still connected to, but not overly attached to. So how the project kind of came about was probably over maybe 2 years. I first started writing, actually. Writing down all of the grievances that I had with getting to the point in my relationship with my husband of what does it look like to start thinking about having a family and navigating this baby as well as an actual baby. And I had very mixed feelings on it. I've never particularly felt like a super maternal, I've never felt clucky or anything like that. But I've always known that I want to be a mum. And I've always seen that as a area in the future that I wanted to, you know, part of my future that I felt like was important, but just not having all the warm fuzzies about it. And so I started writing down everything that I was feeling and thinking and processing, and you know, I think anyone who really is in that season of having kids or thinking about having kids, for me, as someone who's very pragmatic, I just started thinking endlessly about what am I going to pass on to my kids, and all of the, you know, cultural influence in my life, and all of the little nuances, and what are the things that they will inherit that are the worst parts of me, and not just the best parts of me, but the worst parts of me. And I really started to internalize a lot of that, to the point where I felt like I wanted to just like somehow paint about it. And so I created this self-portrait where I literally set up a tripod with my iPhone and took the photo one afternoon, and I was feeling extremely weighed down and frustrated by all of these consuming kind of thoughts. And that's really where the work started for me, because from that point I started to refine my feelings as more of a concept or a topic to explore. And I was dropping off some work to Midland Junction's Art Centre's shop, where they have a lot of artists on display. And that week they had released their EOIs for the 2026 calendar. And one of the staff let me know and said, you should apply. We're accepting proposals. And it was the first time in a long time that I've been asked to apply for a show, and it'd been over 10 years since my last solo show. And every year it's on my, you know, goals and to-do list to have a solo exhibition or to work towards it. But it was that at that point I decided I need to invest in this and dedicate time to being deliberate about pursuing this. And so I submitted a proposal where I kind of took all of those floating ideas and tried to put it into a very succinct you know, way of describing the topics, and they accepted my proposal. And so that really sparked the next stage, which was photographing my reference material. I work very closely with a few photographers in Perth. One of them, his name is Henry Pham. Henry and I have been friends for probably as long as I've been practicing. And so he really knows my work, and he also knows the palette that I use, and that influences the way that he takes photos and edits things too. I try and keep things as close to life as possible. And so we got together, I kind of directed and used myself as the model, and were able to come up with the photo references that then created the body of work. And so that's usually where it starts for me, with working with a photographer to try and articulate exactly what I want to say in the paintings. And some paintings are very curated, and then others come about very organically and in the moment. And the works that are form part of the show are a combination of those moments that were very deliberate shots, but there were also some very in-between photos that may not have made great photos, but made really great paintings. And to work with a photographer as a painter, I think that's a really important aspect of that experience, that they would understand that something might make a really lovely photo, but when you go to paint it, a painting that has like half of the arm cropped out might make a beautiful, you know, photograph or a print, but when you go to paint it, it looks like something's missing from the image. So it definitely is a certain eye that you need for taking really good photo references and understanding, being spatially aware. And I'm very fortunate to know someone like Henry who has that kind of understanding in the process of taking the reference photos. It's been wonderful to actually hear people's response to the work. I think so often you are stuck, isolated and alone working, you know, on your art, that you forget about the fact that at some point it's going to hang in a completely separate space to what it is, you know, as it's being made in the studio. And it's now that I'm on the other side of it, being able to hear about people's experiences and engaging with the artworks, that I feel confident with the direction that the work is going in, and even stronger about making artwork that speaks to these topics and themes, because I think they're very important. In my recent body of work, I do explore a lot of my experience with living with endometriosis, and the influence of that over the work is pretty strong. There's a lot of symbolism in these pieces with different still life references, and I reference a lot of fruit that are signs of or symbols of fertility. There's eggs in there, which are pretty self-explanatory. There's some nods to my own heritage, which is layered with my Burmese grandparents and my English mum and my Aussie dad, and the different kind of cultural elements that you start to think more about as you get to the precipice of, I guess, starting a family, which is where my husband and I are at the moment. And so, yeah, I think just in general, that is a life experience that I've really wanted to talk about, because it's relevant to me. And I know that when I find myself in conversations with others to do with similar topics, it's the thing that really connects me to that person in that moment. And I've wanted my art to reflect the same experience, I guess. And I think sometimes, particularly because I studied art, there is such a strong emphasis when you're studying fine art on the conceptual aspect and on the academic side, which is all very important and, you know, forms a lot of, you know, the bones of a professional art practice. But I also feel like I'm human, and I want the work to carry that element of humanness in order to not leave people perplexed and, you know, bewildered, but is something that really like draws them in and connects with them on that deeper spirit kind of level. And yeah, it's taken me a while to get out of my head and get out of my own way in that sense, and to make art that is just the most authentic I can be to myself. And I think that's why I'm really proud of this body of work, because I couldn't have painted anything more true to who I am, I think, as a person. And also treading the line of, I don't want it to become too personal that, you know, I can't detach myself from it. But yeah, I've really enjoyed creating this new body of work for that reason. I don't think I have a typical day in the studio, but I definitely have months of the year now where I can predict what those different quarters of the year will look like. At the moment, actually since 2017, 2017 was when I took on my first public art tender. And it was a mural that is on the corner of Roe Highway and South Street for a big church. It has a cockatoo and Banksia, and my parents' old house used to be directly opposite that site. So it was a project that was very close to me. in proximity, and also just in the fact that it was my first time doing anything that large scale. And I'd done murals here and there with different art projects, but this was by far the biggest undertaking of my career, just before COVID hit, and that sent me into a completely different path to, you know, the realism oil painting side of my work. But it also was so lovely to be able to use those skills that I'd learnt and practice in realism and be able to apply them in a completely different context. Because I work on public art projects throughout the year, and usually percent for art projects are when there's a brand new development, building, apartment complex or hotel or school that's being developed, redeveloped, and the developer has to allocate a percentage of their overall building fund towards a public artwork. So usually it's 1 to 2% of their budget that they have to allocate to a public artwork. So I have tendered for those kinds of projects since 2018, and I've been very fortunate to now be at a point where I've had enough of those projects to understand the time span of them. Usually they span anywhere between 12 to 24 months, depending on how long the building takes, because the artwork is the last thing to be installed. So if it's a mural, the building has to be made before you can do the mural. If it's a sculpture, it's the last thing to be installed so that there's no risk of damage. And so those kind of projects, I would usually take on maybe 2 of those projects over the span of 12 months. So I allocate certain, time throughout the week, and depending on the different stage, those projects normally have 3 to 4 stages, from concept to design development to fabrication to install. So I would normally allocate so many hours over the span of those 12 months. I also run the painting school, which has about 55 students now who I teach over a fortnight in small group classes. And so usually on a Friday and a Saturday I'm here in the studio, so that looks very typical during the week. And I also take on a small amount of oil painting commissions too, that I work on, and then potentially other exhibition work too. So it can kind of change depending on the time of year. I also run the same content that I teach in my workshops. I offer to high schools. So this time of the year, the beginning of the year, is normally the time where schools value having artists come in to upskill the students and to kind of get them excited about working on their projects for the year. And usually, the first quarter of the year is full with workshops, both in schools and in the studio. And then the second quarter of the year looks like me working on commissions. And if I happen to be working on exhibitions too, then that time is allocated into any other part of the day, week, month that is spare. So it's definitely taken practice to have the discipline of being in the studio. But I also think when I first graduated uni, the first thing I did was look for a studio space. It was the most logical thing I thought that I could do to make the jump from being a hobby artist to a practicing artist. And so I put an ad on Gumtree, which would be the equivalent to Facebook Marketplace these days. And a random lady answered my ad and said, "I've got a shed at the back of my house, you're welcome to rent it out." And so I did that for about 6 months until I found the next shed studio, until finally I arrived at Heathcote at Guyagattup, and I've been here since 2019, so have continued to move around the precinct into larger studio spaces until I ended up in this particular room in August of last year. So each day looks very different, but I'm often in the studio teaching, so you'll usually find me in this space here. I'm very A-type. I have to, regulate my sleep, and I'm in the studio during business hours, and I tried to instill that as early as I could as well in the early days of starting out, because I wanted to take myself seriously, and I wanted other people to take me seriously too, which was hard being so young into things. But since being married, I've definitely prioritised my time differently in a more healthy way, for sure. Not here on all hours of the night. I think the most common challenge that I experience as an artist, but also I know is a challenge for a lot of emerging artists, is how do you price your work? And there is no easy answer for that specifically. It's definitely case by case. But even as someone who has been, I'm kind of on the cusp of like early to mid career, in that I've been painting professionally for over 10 years, but my commercial gallery experience is I'm quite new in that area. And so there's always going to be those challenge points when it comes to pricing your work, because it really is so relative to who are you selling to, what context are you selling in, are you a professional, are you a hobbyist? Like, it's going to look different for everyone. But I think a lot of emerging artists don't actually realise that Nava on their website has a very in-depth, comprehensive guide to how to price yourself, in terms of how much you charge for workshops, to if you're invited to be an exhibition judge, to how much to charge for speaking engagements, to how much to charge for exhibiting a body of work with a gallery. Like, they're quite in-depth about things. And so I would always direct people to Nava if they're ever unsure of how to start, where to start in terms of pricing their work. But it also depends on what kind of work you're doing as well. And I think it's in those moments where I'm very grateful for the people who are in a very similar spot to me at the moment in their career. I have two different small group of artists that one of them is a WhatsApp group. We are based all around different parts of Australia and New Zealand. And we are often messaging each other, asking each other questions about everything from paint mediums to pricing work to galleries, and just every topic under the sun we talk about. But also there are a couple of artists who I regularly catch up with and am part of a group conversation with, who are based in Perth, who are also exhibiting regularly, pricing their work. And so it's nice to be able to have those conversations with my peers to see if I am at industry standard, not just basing my pricing on the value that I think I have as an artist, because I think that if you were to do that as a woman, you're always going to devalue your work, just naturally. I think that that's just something that is kind of there by default for a lot of us. But especially since I've entered the public art and the percent for art world, I've really had to assume a lot more confidence in what I'm charging. And I think when it comes to the gallery space, probably a little bit different, and it functions differently. But that's definitely always going to be, I think, a challenge point for me personally. As much as I identify myself as a businesswoman, because you have to run a business to do, art full time, I'm an artist first, and I do not automatically assume the position of someone in business. I assume the position of an artist. So having those people in your life that are in the industry or are currently in a similar situation career-wise is really, really valuable and important in order to face some of those challenges that is very common to face when you're navigating being an artist full-time and selling your work. I went to Europe in September, and it was my first time visiting a lot of these iconic galleries, the Uffizi Gallery in Florence and the Louvre and Museum d'Orsay. There's so many beautiful, stunning artworks that I've only ever seen in history books that I finally got to experience in real life, and it definitely came at a good time. The last city that Nathan and I visited while we were away was Barcelona, and we got to visit the Meme Museum, which is the modern European art museum, and it was full of contemporary realist painters. They had an exhibition at the time where they were showcasing 100 artists, very similar kind of exhibition to perhaps like an art prize, a portrait prize here, but the style of work was very, very streamlined into contemporary realism. And it was the best springboard for me to come home to, because I came back and really hit the ground running with my exhibition pieces. But being able to experience both the history of the galleries and these really iconic paintings, Botticelli's work, and so many others. John Singer Sargent had an exhibition that had just opened the day after we arrived, and being able to just be amongst these heroes in the painting world really was quite overwhelming, because of not just the volume of people in those galleries, because it's just crowds of people, but also being able to engage with an artwork where an artist, they would have had no idea that centuries on their work would be influencing millions of people. I just thought that it was so inspiring to think in that through that lens of a legacy, and the art that I'm making now is contextual to the time that I'm living in, as it was for the artists who have created the works that I was experiencing in the gallery. That was all important to them at the time that they were alive. And I think that really brought home the importance of being authentic in what I was painting, and make it really true to what I am experiencing right now, because art is a cultural, social, political indicator of the time that it's created, right? And so being able to then finish our trip by observing artworks that were made by living artists, I was just flooded with inspiration. And my husband came back home very tired, but I came back home extremely inspired to be able to have that same impact on people who were then, in a few months' time, experiencing my work on the wall. That was something that really influenced and inspired the work a lot, as well as some of the symbolism in the work too. In the current exhibition, I have a lot of pomegranates in the work, which is a Renaissance icon for fertility, femininity, beauty, and spirituality as well. And so being able to take a lot of inspiration from those iconic images was something that I wanted to carry into my own work. And then on the contemporary side of things, a lot of the works that I saw in Barcelona were just very heated paintings in terms of the actual temperature that the artist was manipulating in their works. The ones that really stood out to me were the ones that had those real flashes of cad red and a lot of heat to them in the colours that the artist had chosen. So that definitely influenced some of the paintings that I have in the show, in how I wanted to really harness the colours that I have been using on my palette for many years, but probably have tempered down in trying to get more of a realistic skin tone. I've now got the skill level, I think, to play more with saturation in my work on a more kind of technical level. I think in order to create a sustainable art practice, like I've always really valued surrounding myself with mentors, and not just artists, but people who are maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ahead of me in the art world, or even people who sit outside of the art world but perhaps might have business experience or experience in public speaking or in their own chosen career fields. Just being so really just a sponge to absorb as much information as I could and really be open to learning and trying to, it's not always possible, but trying to learn from other people's mistakes too. And I remember the first artist who helped me a lot in terms of just practical ways was actually Pippa McManus. When I first started out full time, she sent me the contract that she would send her clients for commission work, which was a game changer at that point for me, because it just showed me like a whole nother level up that I could take, taking myself seriously, but also in the process of other people taking me seriously. And she inherited a similar thing from Stormy Mills. So it was kind of this beautiful, she was passing on something that was passed on to her that I have since passed on to other emerging artists. And I think that's something that was so valuable early on, to learn as much as I could from different people, from different spheres, to be able to take myself seriously. I think naturally going straight out of school into uni, that gave me a bit more confidence to fall back on when I launched into my art practice as a professional, because I could use my experience in my degree and the professionalism of having studied to support me as a legitimate artist, even though that is so not always the case, and you can absolutely be an artist and an amazing one and a professional one without needing to have a degree. However, because I was so young in things, that really was something that gave me more, it helped me be a bit more robust in the way that I would come across in saying that I'm an artist, or I would actually, initially I introduced myself as I run a business. Oh, what business? Oh, I'm a visual artist, or I'm a fine artist. And so that always kind of set the precedent in my conversations with people, that they would take me seriously over, oh, you're an artist, so what else do you do? Or you're an artist, oh, it must be so nice to, dabble all day. It's like, no, it's so much harder than that. And those comments are actually less and less these days. But I think when I was first starting out, treating the art practice as a business was something that really helped give me more confidence in the way that not just in the way that I was coming across, but in myself. It helped me take it seriously. I think now you have, more than ever, you have resources like YouTube and ChatGPT who can kind of guide you into strategizing with, career decisions that, you didn't have only a few years ago. So definitely leveraging those tools to be able to help support your practice. Why wouldn't you? Part of me sharing very openly is, a lot is to do with my faith. I'm a Christian, and that is my core belief, love, and being that person who can bring life and light into a space, but also my experience in America and being around artists of a different culture who really celebrate and encourage each other. And no culture is perfect, but I think in being in Australia, there is that tall poppy syndrome where we just we want to temper everyone, we don't want anyone to get a big head. And so it's kind of almost this false humility thing, where when I was first kind of a few years into my art practice and I got the opportunity to travel quite a bit back and forth to America, I just found that there was so much to celebrate and championing other people in the same industry, and it was different to what I'd experienced up until that point. And I think that's probably also like influencing the way that I like to champion and encourage others in the same discipline, and not shy away from that, because I think that it's in those places that we actually thrive as a community. So yeah, and I'm very big on legacy and what legacy do I want to leave, and in my artwork, but also in just me as a human being. I'd never want to lose that sense of like humanness. That's why we create art, right? Because we want to express our humanness. And yeah, it's definitely a big value of mine to have that carried through the different projects and the different spaces that I get to have the privilege of being able to teach in. The people who I would describe as mentors up until this point in my career, John Tarry is definitely one person who I've gained a lot of advice from over the years. When I was entering the Percent for Art, public art world, I remember sending him a message because he has a wealth of experience in this area, and he was so quick to be so generous with information in helping me understand how to create a budget and how to structure those stages of the projects, and is very, very transparent about his process, which was very helpful for me at the time because I felt so overwhelmed by this whole new area of project working, almost like an arts management role really. And so it's been really lovely to see at certain points of my career where those relationships have kind of resurfaced, and my exhibition, which launched a few weeks ago, John also had his own exhibition launch at the same venue the same weekend. So it was a very beautiful serendipitous moment for us to be exhibiting alongside each other now as peers. I still don't think about myself like that, but it was really wonderful when I found out that John was also having an exhibition, and he's just so prolific within the architecture and fine art sphere in WA, with his work spanning kind of so many different mediums. And I would also say Maria Tika, who at the time that I met her, she was based out of New York. When I was in my final year of uni and was really struggling to find artists who could teach me practical skills within painting and using oils, I reached out to Maria on Facebook. I just came across her work online and just thought it was amazing, and really aspired to create more like the work that she was producing at that time. And so reached out to her, sent her an email asking her a few questions, and she didn't just respond answering the questions, but she then posed further questions to me to ask myself. And that was the first time I'd really engaged with anyone who was, an artist that was so willing to share information. I think that actually was a real moment for me that helped me to understand the power of encouraging someone who's fresh into things, but also understanding that even sharing information or giving up a few moments of my time or my day to answer questions can go such a long way. And yeah, I think that was really valuable for me when I was still, at that point I was still studying, and it helped me immensely in shaping the direction that I chose to go in. The biggest piece of advice I could share with someone who is wanting to pursue a style similar to what I do in realism, whether it's painting, drawing, whatever it might be, is always going to be practice. Just practice, practice, practice. You can never, ever underestimate the amount of hours that you invest like in your skill set is never in vain, ever. And it does require, like, I think Malcolm Gladwell is like the 10,000 hour theory, right? So you invest 10,000 hours and then you start to reach that point of mastery, I guess, in that area. I think a lot of people give up too quickly, not understanding that this isn't a skill that you're necessarily born with. You don't wake up with a skill like this. It's just, some people do have that natural inclination in the same way that certain people are born with bodies that lean towards them being athletes. However, there are always those people within those areas of expertise that have just trained and, you know, in the same way that I was never the most talented person in my art classes. I always had the enthusiasm and the motivation there, but I was never the most rawly gifted. But I practiced and I had to work really hard to see those results. To the point where now I'm viewed probably as that person who is just naturally gifted, but there's nothing natural about it. You just have to work really, really hard to apply the hours to see the results. So I would never underestimate the power of practice. And also understanding that in order to paint and draw realistically, it heavily relies on your skills in observation. Getting your hand to be in sync with what your eyes are observing rather than the other way around, and retraining that, because we're so used to writing really quickly. It's almost like our brains have to catch up to what our hand's doing, whereas in painting and drawing, it's the opposite. You have to rewire that mode of working to allow your eyes to see and your hand to follow what you're observing. And again, that is also attained through just the discipline and the practice of doing it. But yeah, heightening and training your skills in observation is what will make you a better artist in my view. I think a common misconception about being a creative is that you sleep all day and you work all night, and I'm the exact opposite to that. I try my best to work a 9 to 5 hour in the way that I structure my week. I save nighttime for sleeping. And yeah, I think there is that common misconception in being someone who's creative, that you know, you kind of fit outside of the normal box. In saying that though, I am still, as much as I am very A-type in my tendencies to give structure, and I love a list, love a good list. And ticking things off the list is like, just brings me a lot of satisfaction. But it's also, it's taken me, again, time to practice that way of working. But I also truly believe that I wouldn't be able to be full-time in my practice if I wasn't being disciplined in those hours. Because to run a business, you need to have that awareness of content creation, and you need to be your own marketer, and you need to, have the strategy there, and you've got to wear a lot of different hats. And so I think perhaps the stereotype of an artist doesn't actually fit into the current day artist, because to be an artist now, you really have to be a business person, or be thinking about ways in which you can leverage your art as a business. But also it's a dance, because you don't want that to overtake and overpower what you are working on, and have that influence your work, I think. Yeah, and that just takes time. I grew up in a very large Christian church, and so having to navigate every single week crowds of people And I was very involved in volunteering, and so was often kind of put on a microphone or, having to like navigate conversations with large groups of people. So I definitely know that has influenced my ability to speak in front of people or a camera or whatever, having that practice from an earlier age. But I also feel like now more than ever, people want to see behind the curtain of your art practice, to see the behind the scenes and to get a glimpse of what it is like. And that's where storytelling is so important, to be an artist who has the ability to share stories. And so whether you consider yourself good at business or not, I think that the reality is, in being a professional artist, you do have to wear a lot of those hats. But also we have the technology now, like the things that AI has given us. Although it comes with its challenges, I think now at our fingertips we have the ability to create structure and a business plan, whereas normally you'd have to meet with someone specific to that field of work. But now we have, because of the internet, we have everything at our fingertips. So I think as well as mastering your craft, you also have to spend time looking into who is your audience and where do you see your career progressing into. Is it a commercial space? Is it the gallery space? Is it public art? Like, there are so many different avenues that you could go down. And even though it is overwhelming at times to know which direction to take, I think ultimately you just have to decide what's the kind of art that you want to make and where is that most visible, and what area is it most possible to do that in. And I think for me, I identify first as an oil painter, but the reality is I'm not spending every project throughout the year on an oil painting. I am leveraging my skill set to apply it to a different area like public art or like teaching, to be able to make a full-time wage off of those areas and those projects. So yeah, I think that you have to accept early on, if you want to do this full time, like, you need to assume those different roles. And while it might be helpful to study business, and for some people it might be very helpful, I know that that's not going to be the most helpful thing for everyone. When I was considering what direction to take when I was coming to the end of my fine art degree, when I voiced the potential of doing my master's in business, I had a lecturer scoff at me and say, oh, if you pursue doing an MBA, then you'll never be an artist. And I just don't think that's true. I think that everyone has a unique path that they take to get them to the place that they need to go. And also understanding that nothing is ever wasted. I think that life can take you on different twists and turns. And you just have to be able to harness everything as an experience to inform where you end up. And I think that my life has taken me in lots of different places and directions, but it's all informed where I currently am. So I think while there's no set way to go about pursuing things as a full-time career, you just have to rely on what you know and what you think will be the best way to get you to the next place in your career. I think for me personally, it was never a goal for me to be a full-time painter, which is the dream for many and most artists, to just make full-time. I had a very strong and clear vision when I was younger, even though I'm still young. When I was younger and first started studying, I knew that I wanted to one day have an art school. whether it was a formal school or a more relaxed version of that, I knew that that was part of my future and something that I would slowly make decisions towards creating and making a reality. And so for me personally, where I am right now is, it's been 15 years since that first initial dream, I guess, and to see how it has slowly played out feels extremely satisfying, but it also fills me with so much excitement and anticipation on where to from here. But also, I think because of that, it's given me more, I guess, excitement to know that now that the teaching aspect is where I envisioned it to be, it gives me more excitement to invest in my art practice, because those people who come into the studio to learn how to paint also need to witness a full-time artist making their own way in the industry and in their own practice, and not just an artist who starts teaching and then falls into a stale practice because teaching is the only thing that they do. So I'm very mindful that as much as I love teaching and I'm extremely passionate about that I need to maintain a healthy, diverse practice so that I don't become outdated and so that what I'm teaching is informed by what I'm experiencing in the industry. Every year I am very intentional with setting goals. I think if I'm dreaming really big, I would love to eventually have a program where there's some form of exchanging of students from painting classes to be able to partner with an organisation or another art institution overseas where that exchange of information can be had. I would love to, host some residencies overseas. That would be, I think, my next little goal. And to also have an exhibition interstate and overseas too. I have been self-represented up until this point in my career. And so I'm really curious to see more within that commercial gallery space and to see whether that will be the right fit for me and my work. So a couple of things that I wish that I knew when I was first starting out. The first thing would be that there are resources out there for emerging artists who know how to price themselves and how to find jobs. There is an arts organisation called ArtSource in WA, which frequently updates their members with job opportunities, exhibition opportunities, and we had a rep come out to us in first year of uni, but I had no concept of who they were, what they were about. Which was such a shame because they offered the grad students 1 year of free membership, and I didn't seize that opportunity, which I wish in hindsight I had, because now I pay an annual membership which encompasses insurance so that when I'm on projects I'm applying protocol and safety and all of that. And I think organisations like NAVA as well, and being part of mailing lists for different galleries, different arts organisations is definitely going to keep you up to date and keep you in the loop with currently what's happening in the industry. My piece of advice for younger Rachelle would also be continue to surround yourself with people who are going to support you, champion you, but also be really wise advice givers. And I think also I wish that I knew I didn't have to do it all. I spent a lot of time playing with different mediums, and I think my practice would have been accelerated even more had I just been disciplined enough to stay on that one style or that one medium. And I was probably a little bit quick to try and get my work out there through trying all of the different things rather than just focusing on that one area. I kind of get like itchy, what's the expression, like itchy feet, because I like to do lots of different things, and that's exactly why I am who I am, and I have pursued art as a career because I love the diversity of projects, and I love being able to put on different hats and wear different hats for different projects, because it expresses my creativity in that way. But I think had I assumed early on that getting to the skill would have been quicker of a process if I had just tunnel visioned and been more disciplined in practicing in that one medium, then I think I would have accelerated my learning even more so. So not getting distracted too much is very important when it comes to creating an artistic voice.